right, so we're going to start off with what does it look like to model the multiplication and division of integers? Remember, integers are just positive and negative numbers, and we include the number 0, which is not positive nor negative. And we're going to start with multiplication and what it looks like to model multiplication. So I'm going to start with the expression 4 times 3. And we want to think of this in terms of words. What does 4 times 3 represent? So the first number in any expression always represents the groups. So I have 4 groups, and there are 3 in each of those groups. So let's draw a picture to represent that. I'm not going to use my colors today. I'm just going to use my positive and my negative tiles, or those signs, to kind of show what that looks like. So if I have 4 groups of 3, there would be 1 group of 3, 2 groups of 3, 3 groups of 3, and 4 separate groups of 3. So this is what it looks like in array form. So let's talk about what this looks like on a number line. Now, on our previous number lines that we've done with integers, we've always used straight lines to show the value of each number. But since we're talking about groups, because we're multiplying, I want you to picture a little bunny that's going for a hop. So the groups represents how many times the bunny hops. The second number represents how far that bunny travels. And just like with our last number lines, we're always going to start at the number 0. So my bunny is going to hop 4 times because I have 4 groups. And each time he hops, he's going to hop 3 spaces. So it would be 1 hop or 1 group, 2 hops or 2 groups, 3 hops or 3 groups, 4 hops or 4 groups. So 4 groups of 3, or 4 times 3, gives me a value of 12. Okay, our next one, our expression is 4 times 3. Remember, this very first number here represents the groups. So I have 4 groups of -3. So let's draw these with tiles. So there would be 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups. These always look like faces to me. It makes me laugh. Okay, so when I do my number line, again, we're going to think of bunnies. So my bunny's going to hop 4 times and travel a value of -3 each time. So let's start at 0. My bunny's going to hop 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. So I get a value of -12. Okay, and this last one is the funkiest one to kind of look at because I have -4 times -3. Now, it's impossible, right? We said this very first number represents the groups. Well, it can't have a negative amount of groups. It would be really weird if I gave you some Jolly Ranchers and said, I need you to separate these Jolly Ranchers into 5 negative groups. Like what? That doesn't even make sense. So when I have a negative on that first number, it doesn't mean that I have negative groups. It means that I'm going to take the opposite of that 4 groups of -3. So let's talk about what this looks like. So again, that first one right there means the opposite. And then inside, I have 4 groups of -3. So let's draw what 4 groups of -3 looks like. That would be 1, 2, 3, making my 4 groups. Okay, so I have 4 groups of -3, but I need the opposite of that. Well, since I can't do the opposite of my groups, I have to still have 4 groups. That means I have to find out what is the opposite of -3. Well, remember, the opposite of a negative is just a positive. So that would be 4 groups of 3. So 1, 2, 3. Oh, my groups got sloppy. So this right here is the opposite of 4 groups of -3. I get 4 groups of +3. So it would be my bunny hop's going to hop those 4 times, 3 spaces. And I get a value of +12. Oops, looks like I forgot to fill that in here. Whoops, that should be -12. So looking at our values here, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. So when I had a positive times a positive, I ended up with a positive answer. When I had a positive times a negative, I ended up with a negative answer. And when I had a negative times a negative, I ended up with a positive answer. So I'm going to introduce you to a best friend today that's going to help you remember that rule. We'll get to that in just a second. Let's do just a few additional examples here, okay, for my positive and a positive. Let's say I have 4 times 5. So again, we would read this as 4 groups of 5, which would give me a value of 20. 10 groups of 6 would give me a value of 60. 12 groups of 12 would give me a value of 144. So again, a positive and a positive gives me a positive. For my positive times a negative, let's say I have 5 groups of -3. So it would give me a value of -15. If I have 10 groups of -8, that would give me a value of -80. 7 groups of -6 would give me a value of -42. So a positive and a negative gives me a negative. The other thing I want to point out about this is, remember, we've talked about a property before that says it does not matter what order you multiply or add in. That would be, hopefully you know it off the top of your head, our commutative property. So I could switch this around and say a negative times a positive, and it would still give me the same results, right? I could switch this and say -8 times 10 would give me -80. Doesn't matter the order. If I have 1 negative, 1 positive, I'm going to end up with a negative answer. And then the negative times a negative. So if I have the opposite of 5 groups of -2, that would be 5 groups of +2, which gives me 10. If I have the opposite of 9 groups of -4, that would be 9 groups of +4, which gives me 36. If I have the opposite of 4 groups of -10, that would be 4 groups of +10, which gives me 40. Okay, so I'm going to teach you guys a trick that helps you remember the rules for when we multiply and divide integers. Your new best friend is this triangle right here. My students from previous years named the triangle Tom. So Tom the triangle, you can name the triangle whatever the heck you want to, but this is your new BFF when it comes to multiplying and dividing with integers. And here's how we set up our triangle. You're going to put a positive sign at the top of your triangle and a negative sign in both bottom corners of your triangle. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. It's hard to read. Okay, so here's how we use this. When you are given a problem that is either multiplication or division, I'm going to do our first one here, a 4 times -5. You are going to cover up the signs that you have in this problem. So 4 is positive, so I'm going to cover up the positive symbol. -5 is negative, so I'm going to cover up a negative symbol. And whatever is left in your triangle, that is the sign of your answer. So I know my answer is going to be negative, and 4 times 5 gives me 20. So 4 groups of -5 gives me a value of -20. Our next one, -12 divided by -6. So I have -12, cover up a negative. -6, cover up the other negative. So I'm left with a positive, which means my answer is going to be positive, and 12 divided by 6 gives me 2. Okay, now our next one is +20 times +3. Now you're going to look at this and go, Miss Smith, there's not 2 positive signs. What do I do? Y'all, this is just regular multiplication. It's 20 times 3, which gives me 60. Okay, I want you to try the next few on your own, and we will check. Okay, so I have +16 divided by -4 means my answer is going to be negative, and 16 divided by 4 is 4. I have -7 divided by -7, so my answer is going to be positive, and 7 divided by 7 is 1. I have -120 divided by -10. My answer is going to be positive, and 120 divided by 10 is 12. I have -8 divided by, or excuse me, that's a multiply, times -3. So a negative and a negative is going to give me a positive, and 8 times 3 is 24. I have +6 times +7. Again, that's just regular multiplication. 6 times 7 is 42. I have negative 48 divided by negative 8. A negative and a negative gives me a positive, and 48 divided by 8 gives me 6. And then last but not least, I have positive 81 divided by negative 9. A positive and a negative gives me a negative, and 81 divided by 9 gives me 9.